Kia ora tātou, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming and learning more about pesticides. And we especially would like to thank the Ngāti Pai and the Oceans Hotel and Nick, who have been very supportive and who are letting us use this venue. It's great community spirit. Thank you so much. Emergency exits, I think, is pretty obvious. And the toilets are out the door and around to the left. And I think everything else is self-explanatory. Last year in July, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Nora Scheib. I'm from the Northland Toxin Awareness Group. Last year in July, we had Dr. Mariel Watts give a presentation on the effects of pesticides on human health and the environment. While I was going around handing out invites, I heard a lot of comments on roadside spraying. People have noted how much is being sprayed and were wondering where it's going to end up. I contacted Jack Craw to pick his brain. And Jack has 40 years, 40 years of experience working for various institutions such as the Auckland Council as Biosecurity Manager, for Auckland Regional Council, Northland Regional Council, as a consultant for the United Nations and the UK government, also as a chair of Forest and Bird and Friends of Matakoi Limestone Island Society. He created the DOC National Weed Management Manual and the Auckland Regional Council Weed Management Best Practice Manual. When I called Jack spent over an hour explaining to me how to minimize and avoid the use of toxins and eliminate human exposure through the use of method of least disturbance, or MOLD, and what he calls weed replacement therapy. Everything he said made so much sense and sounded so good that I wanted you all to know about it, and I asked him if he would come out and talk to our community. Then Solange Belli came back from France. Solange is one of the original members of the Toxin Awareness Group. In France, she had seen a documentary about the International Monsanto Tribunal, which tells the story of people from all around the world who have come together in The Hague in Brussels to give testimony to a panel of international judges about their experience with glyphosate. The resulting documentary shines a light on the latest information on glyphosate and a product commonly known as Roundup. Solange was horrified. I have used Roundup myself at some time, and I found this documentary a real eye-opener. But first, we'll hear Jack Craw on weed replacement therapy, and after a short break, we'll watch this documentary. Please welcome Jack Craw.
Thank you, Nora. I lived in North most of my life, but I went to Melbourne for 3 years, and then I was in Auckland for 11 years as a biosecurity manager. But I've been home for 4, and it's lovely to be home. There's no place like home. And look at it, it's home. I just got a bit of news. Stephen Hawking died. He was 76. He always said, "Be curious, be curious." But I just heard this lovely little quote of his. Someone asked him if, you know everything about time and space and everything, right? He went, maybe. And they said, time travel, is that possible? He said, well, I've proved it isn't, because I held a party for time travellers, but I didn't tell anybody. I just ordered all the champagne and all the hors d'oeuvres, and I just left them there, and nobody turned up. I was there for 6 hours waiting for people to show up. It's true, he did that. Okay, what is weed replacement therapy, apart from being my best ever joke? I quite like it. Anyway, the first thing we need to do about weeds is, weed is just something that's growing in the place. And almost always it's an adventive species, an exotic. And why are exotic species much more weedy than native species? It's because every plant, like every animal, grows up somewhere, and they're part of a food chain. And every weed has pathogens that eat it, and insects that eat it. They eat the seed, or they eat the stem, or they eat the leaves, or they destroy the photosynthetic ability of it, or something like that. But trouble is, when these new species are brought in, and often they're brought in as a horticultural specimen and sold in shops, they're brought in as a pure seed, and they've all been sprayed to make sure they've got no diseases. So they have no insects, no pathogens, no viruses, fungi or phytophthora or anything. They come here and they're planted, and then of course they're publicised, and then they're spread around the country to all these shops, and they're advertised, and everyone buys them. And you couldn't think of a better mechanism for spreading weeds, could you? Because they've been sort of lionised and protected and everything. And then they're spread out, and everyone loves them, and people say they're lovely. And next thing, you've got a weed. Now, they don't have any enemies, and they have a tremendous advantage over native species, which is why it's my introduction, because it's a little plug for biological control. Biocontrol, yes, it's meddling, but the major meddling was done when the foreign species were brought in without their attendant parasites and allowed to lord over all the native species. What biological control attempts to do is re-establish the natural ecology of that plant by bringing in a natural enemy of that plant that's only an enemy, a predator of that plant. And it's called host specificity testing, and it's extremely rigorous, and I've funded it quite a bit and had a little bit of field control stuff of it. And I've also looked at research, well, how safe is it? And there's been about 70 odd agents released in New Zealand to date, and they've all been safe. They've all been proven to only predate that species. So it's a plug. I'm putting a plug in for biocontrol because biocontrols actually work. There's a couple of weeds like mistflower. It looks like that. What the hell is it called? Mexican devil looks exactly like that, and it's the major weed of Kauri forest, and now you hardly see it at all because an insect and a fungus were brought in, and they only eat that one thing, they predate it, and now you hardly see that weed. It's there, but it's not important because the biocontrol agents did the work for us. No residues, they work 7 days a week if they don't want overtime. That's the way to obviously cure the problem. Okay, now about weed control. Some of the stuff's boring. I'm not going to be talking too much about Monsanto, except I will say this, or glyphosate. I will say this, that we need to separate out Monsanto from glyphosate for a couple of reasons. Glyphosate's off patent now, and lots of other companies make it. And some of the glyphosate that people buy is not safe. We've got a real problem with the EPA in New Zealand, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is what I call the Environmental Polluters Advocacy Group, and they just seem to let everyone get away with everything. I've been to the EPA twice, one to bring in a biocontrol agent and one on behalf of councils trying to get a whole bunch of pesticides banned. We got everything we asked for. We didn't even get scrutinised. It was just amazing. The EPA is a rubber stamp. I don't believe the EPA is doing its job. It's a shame. The old Irma did a better job. This one is, I mean, if you're going to with a proposal, it's great. You just get what you want. But, I really did expect more scrutiny. So I think the EPA needs an overhaul. But that's just another thing. But anyway, separating out glyphosate from Roundup. I have an extreme enmity with Monsanto. I believe Monsanto to be one of the evil corporations of the world. It's like, you can't come up with a purer form of evil than Monsanto. Because the bit about Roundup Ready, I mean, the background of the company was, like a lot of herbicide companies, they've tried to find all this different chemistry, and really there's been no chemistry really developed in the last 30 years, perhaps a little longer. When I first came up, I was a noxious plants officer with the county in 1978, and there was new herbicides happening all the time. There hasn't been a new herbicide in 20-something years. There's just new ways of using old ones. And that's good news, eh? That's good news, because I mean, a lot of pesticides, like with the EPA, things get released before they've had any kind of longitudinal testing to find out if they're safe or not. And there's an awful lot of products out there, like, what's the thing they put in soap, hand wash? Absolutely incredibly banned. I should know this, shouldn't I? I'm just taking this off the top of my head. That's sanitised soap. What's this stuff called? It's completely unsafe. Shouldn't use it. The stuff that says kills 100% of bacteria. It's liquid soap.
Oh, tetracycline.
Sorry? Tetracycline, yeah. awful. Don't buy it. It's incredibly unsafe. Anyway, so Monsanto decided they were essentially a one-molecule company, glyphosate. And they kind of peaked with all the glyphosate they could sell. So they had a bright idea, how can we use more glyphosate? So what they did was they said, well, why don't we get into the kind of the GM business and make crops? Because glyphosate kills everything, just basically kills just about everything. It's non-selective. But if they develop a GM crop, and they started with soy and maize and a few other things, that people could just spray the whole crop and kill the weeds, and the crop will be fine. So they developed that, and of course the rest is history. Now virtually all the American food you eat is contaminated with glyphosate. And that's the single most important take-home message from me tonight is we've got to keep GM Roundup out of New Zealand. We've got to keep GM Roundup out of New Zealand. It doesn't make economic sense. It's not safe, because we've got to keep it out of our food. That's the most important thing, isn't it? Keep it out of our bloody food. So we've got to keep it out. Now, Monsanto's very clever. Back when we were doing our regional pest management strategy, no, before then, sorry, it was about 2008. I had a group of greens people from golf clubs come to see me and said, we've been approached by this company, it was actually a front from Monsanto, about bringing in a new grass called Roundup Ready Creeping Bent. It's Agrostis stolonifera. It's just a common little grass that you see around. And it's a minor league weed in New Zealand. It's kind of a weed of marshlands and water's edge, riparian weed. And it gets in the way of a few other things. I mean, it gets into your ponds. A lot of people don't like it. It's a bit like Mercer grass or kaikiu. It just gets on the edge of your pond and that kind of thing. So it has no worth in New Zealand. But it was promoted in the States, and it's used in the States a lot on golf courses because you can plant it, and then of course you can kill all the weeds because you can spray it with Roundup. And the greenkeepers guy said, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea, we can spray the Roundup. And I said, did you know that Agrostis stolonifera or creeping bent is a minor league weed in New Zealand? Why would we say yes to a weed we can't kill? You know, a weed that's Roundup proof. Because glyphosate was the only spray that kind of worked. If you have to use a spray, glyphosate was the only one you could legally use over water or in riparian areas. So we said no to it. So they thought, well, if they can't get the Auckland market, they might as well not do it. And I thought, shit, we've got to win. We've got an absolute win, and I was very happy. I found out later on that if they'd have got across Auckland, they'd have got the whole thing into New Zealand. And once they got a one Roundup ready crop in New Zealand, it was all open slather. So they weren't starting on food, they were starting on golf courses. So you've got to be aware all the time. Now, I'm not anti-herbicides. I've used a lot of herbicides. I mean, a lot of people may disagree with me. I have used quite a lot of glyphosate. So I separate glyphosate out from Monsanto. And by the way, I never buy Roundup. I never buy Monsanto's in principle. I believe that you can use herbicides safely, and I'll explain some of the ways you can use it safely. Because the whole idea is keep it out of our food and prevent any kind of human exposure. Okay? If you can do that, maybe we can get away with using some pesticides. Some people may not agree. That's as far as I go. So, we need to eliminate exposure. So, at the moment, what's happening is there's a massive amount of glyphosate and pesticides that are used in New Zealand. Sorry, separate out animal pesticides from herbicides. We're just talking herbicides tonight. A massive amount of overspray is done because several reasons. One, people just basically spray pesticides, herbicides. There's lots of other ways to apply them that aren't being used. Secondly, there's a whole lot of cases we shouldn't be using herbicides at all. Now, I want to go back to first principles here. When you look at a weed problem, whether it be a roadside or your rose garden or a piece of bush, whatever it is, people often say, there's a weed, what's the best spray for that? That's got to stop. What's the best spray for that is just stupid. Because you'll spray the weed, you'll leave a bit of bare ground and more of the same weed will come up. Because most of the weeds we're talking about are several. They're the things that first colonise open spaces or bare spaces. Weeds love bare space. Native forest and everything that we are trying, whether it be spinach or carrots or native bush or dune lands or native, in a river or a lake, we're trying to get something else to grow there that should grow there, not something that we don't want to grow there. So the whole idea is to fill that space up. So when you first find a situation where you've got a weed, the first thing you should say is, what am I trying to do here? People say, I'm trying to kill the weed. No, that's the wrong answer. We're trying to create another habitat. Okay? Now I'll take a native bush scenario. Spraying inside of native bush is normally the wrong thing to do because you'll end up with a bit of bare space, and the first thing that comes away is like gorse, pampas, Tradescantia, ginger, all the things that we hate. Because they've been given an opportunity, we've simply got to look at the conditions that favour the species we want and don't favour the species we don't want. So you have to look at it holistically. Okay? What am I trying to do here? That's what you have to do. You don't think, I'm trying to kill a weed. No, you're not. You're trying to recreate the ecology, or you're trying to stop this oxygen weed from clogging up the river, or you're trying to keep oxalis out of your garden. I used to speak to a lot of garden clubs, and they always go, what's the best way to kill oxalis? That's the only question you've ever got, just about. And I go, I've got 7 different ways of killing oxalis, and they all light up. And I go, and none of them are any good. Well, they all work, but no one likes to hear them, like plant concrete, or plant something taller, or get chickens in a little hutch and put them over it. They dig them all over and eat them. It's the best one. And I was giving a talk out at Helena Bay one time, and this Maori lady said, Kuni pig will do that. So that was pretty good. You just put a pig pen around, they eat all the oxalis, and you keep moving the pig. So they all work, but some of us don't want to do that. So it's a bit the same with spraying. People say, oh shit, I'll just spray it. Well, that's kind of short term. And we've all done it. So what you have to think about is, I say, weed replacement therapy is, what am I trying to grow here? Not, am I going to kill that weed? What am I trying to grow here? And with weed replacement therapy, we're replacing the weed with the desirable. You can't just spray a weed and expect it to stay that way. That's why our roadsides look so bad. People, they look at a roadside, they go, well, it's weeds, they spray it. Christ, that's a really dumb thing to do most of the time, because you're using Roundup most of the time, or glyphosate, spray it all. What's the first thing that comes up? More of the primary invaders like kikuyu, pampas, gorse, privet, moth plant, all the things you bloody don't want. I think councils should really have to take cradle to grave costing, saying, okay, what's it costing us now? What are we doing? What do we want? They don't do that. They leave that kind of thing up to engineers. And I've always thought that engineers, I hope there's no engineers in the room, because I find them kind of like a different species. They're not quite like normal humans. They always think, that'd be cool, let's try that. And you go, what about? They go, oh no, thank you, mate. This is cool, you can do that. And they're always looking at engineering possibilities, but they don't follow through. I'm generalising terribly, and I should be shot for this. But anyway, I deal with a lot of engineers in some of my consulting work, and they're really quite hard to convince about, no, that wasn't a very bright idea to get a bulldozer in there, because you're just going to, get a lot of bare ground that's going to come up and gorse. They go, well, that doesn't worry me. I've built my little road and I'm off. And someone else has got to deal with this. And I thought, well, maybe there's another way you could have attacked it. So you've got to think about cradle to grave costing, what it all means. So, and what that all comes down to, if you care about weed control at all, is method of least disturbance, or MOLD. MLLD, method of least disturbance. If you're in your garden, you're trying to, in the back of your section, or your Tanaka block, and you're trying to get that regenerating native bush into bush, use the method of least disturbance. Now, that normally means you don't spray. You can either pull it up, or sometimes, like if you've got gorse and you've got reverting native bush and the gorse is still on top of it, but you've got other natives, you know what you can do? You can just chop that gorse. That's all, chop it. Because natives will come through. Gorse requires light. It doesn't do any good in the bush. You don't see it growing in the bush. In fact, if you did absolutely nothing, it will be succeeded within 30 years. If you did absolutely nothing, it'll be succeeded in 30 years. With woolly nightshade or tobacco weed, it's about 40 years. Some of us can't live that long, so what you do is just chop it at ground level and leave it. The stuff will come through. You may have to go back one or two or three times and give it another chop because it still keeps coming. But if you did nothing, it would still be fine in 30 years. But you can make it look nicer and you can accelerate that process by just giving it a little chop. Simple. What we don't want to see people do, and people do this all the time, is they say, well, there's a bit of bush here and a bit of bad stuff. I'm going to spray the whole thing with glyphosate, we'll start again. That's kind of like the worst thing you can do. Because what happens is, you've killed everything, good and bad, and the first thing's back is the bad. The really aggressive gorse and pandas and things like that. So we don't want to be using blanket kind of spraying methods. Now, on roadsides is a good example. In my view, councils could cut back their use of glyphosate by probably 95%. Okay? You shouldn't be spraying it at all. Because your roadsides, you should be mowing them. Okay? You should mow them. What happens when they're sprayed is it goes from being grass dominated into being dicot dominated. We get all these other things that grow up and they're this high, and of course then they get in the way of the marker posts and all the signs that you can't hit. So they just keep spraying. So the whole idea of spraying, it becomes self-perpetuating. You have to keep spraying. You've got to convert, so we go back to first principles. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to make the roadside have low vegetation that looks nice, that doesn't get in the way of the marker posts and the signs, that doesn't cause any kind of, it allows the water to run off the road surface. But increasingly we're putting large roadsides now, they're massive water tables and road reserve on the other side, and they just keep spraying and spraying, and it'll get uglier and uglier. And if you have a look at you drive around most councils in New Zealand, you'll find their roadsides are getting worse in terms of appearance. They're losing native vegetation, they're losing desirable vegetation because there's so many sprays are being put on them, and they're looking more and more untidy. They should be mowed. And a lot of guys will say, well, it costs more to mow than it does to spray. Yes, it does. One mowing is more expensive than one spraying, but if you're mowing 6 times a year, it's a hell of a lot nicer and cheaper than what you will eventually have to do if you keep spraying. Okay? You'll end up with something that's really ugly, then you've got to restart again and replant and anyway, who wants it? Who wants these ugly looking areas? I mean, it's like the whole idea of looking at sprays is like so unholistic. It's exactly the same. I mean, we're all human, the same thing. We feel sick, we go, where's that pill? I need a pill. And we're all looking for a pill. It's like the same thing, we're looking for a spray. Instead of saying, what's actually wrong with me? Let's find out what's wrong with me before we take the pill. It's the same with like the use of sprays. We default to sprays because we should be saying, hang on, what's wrong with the spot here? What do I want to grow here? And you're not going to cure that by spraying, almost never. Now, if you do have to spray, I've got a whole bunch of recommendations, which I'm going to leave here. Now, I wrote, in 1999, I wrote the National Weed Manual for DOC on contract, and they're still using it, they haven't changed it, so how much like it? Anyway, maybe they can't afford to replace it. Anyway, and I've got the first 10 pages out, and I'm leaving them with Laura, and I'll send it to you electronically if you want it. And it's just basically the principles of what method of least disturbance means and how you look at the site before you start. Try and figure out, I won't go into the details, it's a lot to do with things like, don't redirect water if you can possibly avoid it, because that leads to different kinds of situations. Don't use fire. Don't use fire. Fire's awful. It's just stupid. New Zealand didn't evolve with fire. Our forests don't like it. It doesn't do us any good. Most of our native species don't germinate in fire, they get destroyed. A lot of weeds require fire. The more fire they get, the more they grow. There again, your pampas and your gorse and your hakea and lots of things like that, they love it. So why would you do it? Also, you destroy the humus layer. We've got to get the humus layer up. The thing is, what we've done, I remember an ecologist once said to me, well, we were down in Westland and I was walking, this is a long time ago, about 1971, I was young then, and was walking through this forest in Westland, and I fell into a hole. It was about 4 foot down. And I was actually standing on a tree trunk, didn't know. And he said, this guy said to me, I was telling him later on, he said, no, the New Zealand native bush, before humans, the forest stuff was typically between 2 and 4 feet thick. Between 2 and 4 feet thick. It's one of the reasons why native trees don't do anything. They're just growing in like this much dirt. They're growing in dirt. Well, of course, most native species don't grow in dirt. They grow in the humus that soil has been built up. The humus has been built up by detritus and leaves and everything else that falls, and insect bodies and everything that falls on the soil. But we've done away with that by putting cattle and possums and everything else has gone through them, deer, goats, pigs, and they've destroyed that. So we've got, it doesn't matter where we are, we need to get that humus level up, and you're not going to do that with spraying. You'll do it with mowing. So it doesn't matter where you are, even on a roadside, getting the humus layer up is a good idea, because it'll lead to fewer weeds and more desirable, and if it's on the roadside, it'll be grasses normally. There's also a lot of things you can do with roadsides, by the way. They don't have to be grasses. There's a whole lot of wildflowers you can plant, and there's many lists of acceptable species that aren't weedy that you can plant. When you have a weed that comes in, normally, in any situation, you end up with a successional process. If you, in native bush, like I say, it's been levelled off, normally you'll get some ferns will come back first, and maybe some manuka or kanika, and then it'll go through tree fern stage and then through forest stage. And the terminal species are your large podocarps or your large broadleaf trees. Now, if a weed is introduced, like say Tradescantia or wild ginger, they'll kind of covers the forest floor, and then you stop that whole natural successional process, and you'll lead to a whole new successional process. And I've actually watched that out at Tairuru. I had a little unofficial research site I put out there for about 15 years, and in that time we noticed it went from forest with ginger to being a few poles with kikuyu underneath, because the wild ginger took over the forest floor. There was no regeneration of anything else. Only a site about an acre. Everything else, and then when there's no regen, as the trees died, the light levels rose, and then the kikuyu moved in. So we went from native bush to kikuyu in about 40 years. That's pretty bad. It had been great before that. So it was native bush, it would be a lot more, pristine bush would be a lot more robust. So that's another thing. We've got to keep livestock and browsing mammals out completely. And if you want to talk about Karadama, I can talk about that, and that's another huge area problem. We just need to keep people out. So when you get, a lot of people say, oh, well, it's really nice to have these nice native species here, but I'm going to put an acmena because the pigeons love it, or I'm going to put a loquat because the pigeons love it, or I like it, blah, blah. What happens is they become weedy, they take over. So instead of adding to biodiversity by adding these new species, you're actually subtracting, because one foreign species like acmena could replace 30 native species. Like out here, for instance, you hardly even see tauapo anymore. A tauapo, famous nursery, it really should be a very dominant plant around here, but it's not. And it's a real shame, because other things have taken up its space. So when people say, oh, I like to have a mixture of natives and not, because it adds to biodiversity, they're not adding to biodiversity, they're detracting from it. So little tips. If you're trying to keep weeds at bay, try and keep the light level down. Try and make your tracks a little more narrow, because the more you make them, more broader they get, the more weeds they'll get. And when I took over in Auckland, in biosecurity there, regional parks had all their park rangers running through all their tracks spraying with Roundup, and I had that stopped overnight, because what they were doing, they were saying, there's a bit of gorse there, and Roundup's easy, you don't need to have a trained guy, and he can walk 10k in a backpack and spray the gorse. They were just because they're killing everything, you see, because the track was getting wider and wider and wider, and we're getting more weeds because we're getting more light. So over 5 or 6 years, straight away we got the tracks more narrow, the shade came in, and a lot of the gorse just disappeared, because it needs light. So that's one, you just manipulate the conditions, okay? Try not to divert water away from its natural course. Try not to disturb ground cover and seedling species. Method of least disturbance. Try not to disturb the seedbed, because weeds love disturbance. Keep it pristine and keep the mulch up. Keep stock out, of course. You've got to plan what you're doing before you start. I think most of you probably want to talk about glyphosate more than anything else, but I've got a whole lot of recommendations here about how you deal with things like, how do you deal with a lot of weeds like Tradescantia or propagules. seeds or rhizomes. A really good way to do it in a home situation, or if you've got a bit of bush, is to buy those big black plastic bags, pull the stuff up and throw it in a big plastic bag and leave it, especially in the sun. The sun will cook it. Herbicide free. Okay? The sun will cook it. And then after a few months, you just tip it out and start again. And you can, and I've got friends down in Kapariki in Auckland who've done a whole reserve, no herbicides, in Trader's Canter, the Wandering Willie, which is an absolute bitch of a thing, really. But they've done it without using any herbicide at all, using the solarization of the black plastic bag. Because the inside of those bags get really, really hot. It cooks the stuff. We don't advise people to burn anything.
What about the tobacco weed?
Yeah, tobacco weed's pretty bad. The best thing for the small stuff is hand pull it. Go around in the winter time, anything below about that, just pull it up. And it doesn't reach-back, just pull it up and drop it, it's fine. The big stuff, chop it down. Now, if it's really big and it's going to, if you chop it down when it's really wet, you just lacerate that stump with an axe. Sometimes that'll kill it. And sometimes you have to keep coming back, peeling a bit more of that bark off. And say you chop it down this high, this high above the ground. If you peel that bark right off, because stuff doesn't grow from the centre of the plant, it grows from the cambium layer, which is just inside the bark. The slippery, yeah. So you can kill it that way. It is exhaustive because you will have to keep coming back. But don't spray. Don't spray. I've never sprayed. Well, I have many, many years ago. I haven't sprayed in 30 years. You chop it down and you can apply Grazon or Vigilant gel to the stump. I'm not a big fan of Vigilant gel because it's picloram and that does have a soil life for up to 2 or 3 years, so it will leach out from the roots. You're better off to use perhaps Grazon or what's it called, triclopyr, and just dab a bit of that on the stump, and that's metabolised in the plant. But you can kill woolly nightshade or tobacco weed without using any herbicides. The other thing, it loves the light. If it's growing in amongst other stuff, if you keep chopping it out, other stuff will overtop it. Even stuff like pampas. I remember I looked at a site, or several sites now in the Bay of Plenty, where and some in Northland too, where the landowners, sometimes will be iwi or sometimes not, they'll get a big bit of bush or regen on the side, do something with it, spray it all or burn it, and then they don't follow through. And then it just comes up with some regen and a whole lot of pampas. And I've seen sites that had that done 30 years ago and then done nothing else, and now the pampas is all gone. First 5 years it looks like the worst problem on earth, and it is, because it's a fire hazard and possums love it, rats love it because they nest above ground. But if you're patient, it'll disappear. It's a hard ask. The only place it doesn't disappear is a pine forest, because they're felled every 20 years, aren't they? And they get a recharge every 20 years and you get more and more of the same. So I really think the pine forest guys need to really be forced to really do a bit more than they're doing right now, because they're actually adding to the seed bank, really. Yeah, one of the things you can do is you can create a barrier. Like I've seen this done in a couple of places where Kaikui was trying to get from a farm into duneland, and it goes great through duneland. If you plant a hedge of something really dense, like carokias or something like that, and you make it 2 metres thick, the kaikui will struggle to go through that. And you will have the odd little bit, but it doesn't like going through where there's no light. So you can create like a stolon barrier or a rhizome barrier that is something that's dense and something that makes the ground dark. Of course, some stuff will still try and climb over it and you have a little bit of control, but it means you don't have to keep coming through and spraying all the time. For grasses, if you don't like glyphosate, there's a grass-only herbicide called haloxyphop. I don't know if it's any safer. I've just looked at the data I've looked at, says it is. I've got a qualification in toxicology, but I don't call myself a toxicologist because the information you think you know becomes redundant in 10 years. So you have to be completely up to date, and I'm not. So I just take a precautionary principle. So there is an alternative, but I'm not sure if it's any safer. To be honest with you, I'm not unhappy to use glyphosate. I won't buy Monsanto's, but I hardly ever spray with it. I think that the thing with glyphosate is you have to eliminate human exposure, which means you keep it out of our food and Don't spray on roadsides. Don't spray in parks where people walk over it. There's other ways of doing it. Of course, it means a bit more line trimming. It means a bit more judicious planting. I think we could design our way out of a lot of these problems. I mean, most of these weeds like light. You just need to replace that. And I've seen places where you have a berm of really dense hebes. I'm a native plant freak, of course. And you can have a whole bunch of, hebes, the worry ones only go about this high. And you have it maybe 1.5 meters thick. And they'll be a barrier to most weeds. Just another way to do it. I think we need to be planting more bush, having fewer open spaces. Because it's carbon sequestration, it's native species, we're doing favour for bees, and we're improving the soil, we're improving the quality of the water running off it. So, and when I say native forest, I should just mean native habitats. I mean, we have beautiful habitats in dunelands and riparian areas that we haven't really explored. Talking about biocontrol, haven't I? Now, if you have to use herbicides, you can stem inject. Now, I do that quite a lot. I bought an acre on the edge of town. It was full of these huge bloody privet trees and huge Taiwan cherries, massive buddies. So, and I chop them down and paint the stump, or I bore a little hole with a cordless drill and just tip a little bit of escort or metsulfuron in there. It gets metabolized when the plant dies. So you haven't sprayed it at all. And you also use a lot less. Like, I did some work on wild ginger years ago with escort, and the difference, for the same amount of kill, injecting with escort rather than spraying with escort, you use 1/6 as much herbicide. Okay? Use 1/6 if you're drilling, or you chop it and just squirt on that cut stem. Use 1/6 amount of herbicide you would if you were spraying it. If you're spraying it, stuff will drip off and get into soil and kill ferns and whatnot. But if you stem inject, it's metabolized in the plant and you don't get any leaching. So if you decide that's what you want to do, you can do it that way. You can fill a tree. Another thing I've done is you chop them down like this so the bark sticks up like that, and you put a little bit of herbicide around in there. That's normally escort that I use. So that's another way of using it. You can have if you're going to kill something like jasmine, hardest bloody thing in the world to kill. If you can't keep pulling it up, and you can pull it up, and you'll get 80% from pulling it up. The bit that you can't quite get, you just get a little a vial, and you can buy those little vials that you cut flowers in, a little rubber stopper with a hole in them, and you put a little bit of herbicide, and you just put the end of the cut stem into the vial and leave it there. It just sucks it all up over a period of a few days, kills the plant. And you can do that amongst all other desirable vegetation. So there's a number of techniques. Anyway, I'll leave this with you.
Can you just comment on bamboo and how you get rid of that?
I would hire a UHO or a great big Hitachi digger. And honestly, I had to do this myself when I was living in Melbourne. In the end, I thought it was actually cheaper and easier because bamboo only goes down about this far. Okay? It sends rhizomes up that far forever, but it only goes down about 200. So I'd chop it off and get rid of it, because I chopped the tops and the stems off, and I would dig it out, honestly. And because there is a way to do it with pesticide, but it's using amitrol. Now, amitrol is a very old-fashioned herbicide that's extremely corrosive, and I'm not that happy using it. What you have to do is cut it down and then drop some amitrol down into those stems, or wait till it grows. It's no higher than 2 or 3 feet, and spray. But it takes 6 or 7 applications, and every time, first couple of times, it just keeps coming back the same, and you go, that guy gave me bad advice, he's an idiot. And but after about the 3rd or 4th time, suddenly it won't resprout because you're exhausting the root reserves. It's fairly brutal. I've just found, in my own experience, it's better just to dig it out, honestly. Some you can dig out by hand. It may look pretty gruesome, but you can cut it up into sections and dig it out. It's like trying to take stuff that's baked onto you inside of your oven or something. It's pretty hard work, but it does come up. So your bamboo's a bugger. If you've got bugger all over it, you can actually stop it from spreading by planting lots of tall stuff around it, because it needs light. It won't grow in the dark. And I've seen bamboo atrophy and die as big trees grow above it. Okay? It's long term, but there you go. There's lots of other technologies, like you can use weed wiping technology where you're not spraying it, you're wiping pesticides on. But really, the message isn't about using herbicides. The message is find out what's wrong. What's wrong? It could be weeds or something, or it could be too much spraying, or it could be someone's burning the site or it's been corrupted in some way. Find out what you want to put there, and then work out how to go from where you are to where you want to be. And some of that may just be interplanting. You know, you can interplant and weeds will just disappear because they need the light. Most of the species we hate are obligate light lovers. So if you can get something that grows in that place, like for instance, I told you the 7 methods for killing oxalis. The best one is plant something taller. Plant something taller. That's not often possible in your vegetable garden because you want to have carrots and you want to have spinach. So what you want to do is convert that to grass, and I'm going to dig this piece of lawn up over here and put my garden in there. I'm not going to contaminate it with any oxalis bulbs. Actually, the best way to get rid of oxalis is Nana's way. In the summer, you get the screen and you throw the dirt in and you screen it all out, and you take the bulbs out. It's actually, I'm sorry, it's the best way. It's the old-fashioned way. Because spraying doesn't work for oxalis because it's got stems come down into the rhizome, the bulb, sorry, and then another little stem comes down, another one, and they have a property called occlusion. So you spray it, the herbicide goes into the first one, and as soon as it feels sick, it occludes, so that the second bulb doesn't cop the contagion, you see. So you'll kill that bulb, but the next one will send up, and then you'll be spraying it forever. And so spraying doesn't work. It's like onion weed. You don't spray onion weed. Honestly, folks, what you do, if you go, you go to people's gardens and you go, shit, they got a lot of onion weed. I know they've been in there with the Roundup. You can tell. Because it kills everything else and gives the onion weed more room. You're only helping the onion weeds, right? You've actually got to go through in the winter time, hand pull it. When it first comes up, hand pull it, bury it, crush it.
Eat it.
Sorry?
Eat it.
You could eat it. Indeed you can.
What about covering oxalis with black plastic? Just put polythene plastic over it, put it way down so it can't take off, and let it cook for a while.
You mean in the ground without?
Yeah.
That would take a long time because you see, oxalis could be down maybe 70, 80 mils, and it's going to take a long time to get heat down that long. I'd probably want to turn it over maybe. I like the chicken idea. The chicken idea looks pretty good. Get your bantams, put them in a little cage, move the cage around. They scratch it all up, especially in the summer. Scratch it up, eat them all. I quite like that idea. And you get eggs. So,
what about driveways? When you've got a driveway, your objective is to have a driveway, but kikuya just keeps coming in and wrecking that driveway. You can't plant. What would you use?
Well, it's difficult. I just keep running over it. Actually, that's what I keep doing.
All day.
What was the question? How to kill kikuyu in a driveway? I'd have to have a look at the sites. You could, I don't know.
Drive on.
As I say, keep driving on it is my suggestion, but apparently that's not a very good idea.
Well, I can't drive on it enough. Kikuyu is a great survivor, as we all know. And it's like, hey, how do we work with that?
I mean, if you're really fussy and you're in a really flash area, you can create a concrete nib wall, but you've got to go down around about 250 millimetres, okay? That's not for everybody, but it works for some, because it won't go down 250 millimetres up the other side. So, I mean, you can just keep chopping it, I suppose. It depends. I mean, I wouldn't have any problem with applying glyphosate to that. That wouldn't worry me. Yeah. Or haloxyphos, which only kills grasses.
Haloxy what?
Haloxyphos. It's called Galant. Or Ignite. There's 2 brands. Ignite or Galant. Now, I don't know if it's safe or not, but I've read the toxicology on it. It says it's safe. I don't know how much I believe it from the EPA, because there's no herbicide, there's no pesticide data in the world, hardly any more that's been tested independently. Or when New Zealand EPA gets a new pesticide of any type, in fact even food additives, they just take the manufacturer's word for it. And I suppose most of us probably know a little bit about what companies like Monsanto have done. Some of that stuff's been badly discredited, or the trials have been if they get bad data, they throw that away and they only give you the good data. Or they don't do it over time. So nobody knows what the health of animals or earthworms or humans is going to be like in 5 years or 10 years. So I don't know whether to trust any data I get from these people. I just make sure that when I'm using any pesticide, that I'm completely covered. I just don't expose myself to it. And you don't expose children to it either. Yeah.
I just want to say I have a kikuia issue on my driveway, so I just visit the transfer station regularly, get heaps and heaps of newspaper, and just pile thick layers of newspaper on my kikuia, and that does seem to control it for quite a long time. But yeah, it can pull it.
Paper mulch, it's a great idea.
Yeah, well, one of our neighbours is doing now, like, it's recommended farming practices to spray a paddock out with Roundup, spray it with Roundup, and then put cattle and then clean up the residue sort of thing. So it's eventually getting into our food chain of our things, isn't it? So what's sort of...
Yeah, I don't know if it would be getting the food chain. That's a tenuous link, but certainly there's a shitload of that happening. I mean, yesterday, where was I driving from yesterday? I can't remember. Oh, from Auckland the other day. I saw 5 huge big paddocks on the way out. 5 big paddocks being sprayed up, obviously with glyphosate, because they want to replant.
Yeah. And the cattle, they put cattle in to eat that. Well, is that through the bloodstream of cattle?
Oh, I see, yeah, they put cattle in to clean up the dead vegetation. Yeah.
Spray vegetation.
Yep, that's a risk.
And it gets ingesting it. And so is that not getting in our food chain?
Do we have sounds?
I would say it probably is. Yeah.
Well, that's a sort of standard practice, you know. Like, and we all can't believe it's absolutely safe, you know. It's only survived the ground for an hour or so, and there's a toxic, which is not right.
Well, it does bind to clay particles, there's no doubt about it, it does bind, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean a thing. It just means it's not available as a herbicide. It's not doing its herbicide job. It doesn't mean it's disappeared. Yeah. It takes months or years to break down. Yeah, so you're right. Oh, one of the things, just before I leave, one other thing I want to talk about. The use of penetrants. You know, everyone talks about using sprays, they add a wetting agent. Well, in the last 20 years, we're talking about organosilicon penetrants. They are absolutely fantastic at the job they do. They came from the, they were developed for the photographic industry when the Kodak and Co were talking about putting sticker on film. They wanted to get the layer of sticker just perfectly so we get an even job. So they developed this thing that actually kind of destroys the surface tension on the outside of the water molecule. So instead of water sitting there, and you can see this, if you get a water molecule and you put it on a glass slide and you look at it through coarse microscope, it'll sit there, it'll just flatten out a little bit. If you put like detergent with it, it'll flatten out quite a bit. If you put organosilicon, it just runs over the entire surface, underneath the surface, and just coats the whole thing. It just completely runs everywhere. It's like CRC, it'll run right uphill. Now, what that does also, it means that plants can't keep it out, because plants have a nice waxy outside layer, but they have stomata, which are tiny wee holes, and those holes are designed to be around about the size of a water molecule, and they'll open and close depending on what the plant's needs are. But when you add organosilicon, it goes straight through, everything gets sucked right into the plant. So what it does, it makes herbicides that might do some sort of a job suddenly do a great job, and it's being touted as being the greatest thing because you can use a lot less herbicide. Okay, you can cut your herbicide rates down by 2/3. So it's a great idea. Unfortunately, organosilicons are also used, as an example, are used in dermal medicines. You know, people like who have patches, and there are people like with throat cancer can't take medicine, so they put a patch on, and they add an organosilicon, so it goes straight through your skin, so then that drug can be absorbed in the bloodstream. So we're noticing that, I noticed that years ago when we first started using it, I never got sick using Roundup. Suddenly I was getting headaches using Roundup because I was getting dosed, and my skin was no barrier anymore because the organosilicon was pulling it through. Now we know that some tests have been done on bumblebees with organosilicon on its own. It's toxic because it destroys that. It gets sucked in through the outside dermal layer because they've got an exoskeleton that's porous. So these things on their own are toxic. Now, because it's not a pesticide, nobody's ever tested this thing to see if it's toxic. So it's now being used on most spray mixes, and nobody knows what toxicity is. That's another thing that's wrong with EPA. It's just bloody stupid. So it's a tendency for a lot of people to use organosilica, things like it's called Plus and Boost and Freeway and names like that. Be bloody careful. Now what we do know is, for instance, I've seen some data that was used on aerial treatment of glyphosate on willows, big tall willows. And I said, let's not do that, let's stem inject them. It's going to cost a bit more, but in the end we did stem inject because the trial that had been done by another council got quite a lot of dead bees. I said, well, glyphosate's not toxic to bees. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the organosilicon is toxic to bees. Okay. So you got to look. It's not just the glyphosate. It's not just the grazon. It's not just the escort. It's the whole tank mix. And you've got to look at the synergistic effects or the kind of that drawing in impact of that organosilicon. So that's something you need to be very aware of. And nobody even knows how toxic they are, except the New Zealand beekeepers did that work on bumblebees with organosilicon and found it just knocked them straight out of the sky. And organosilicons take a long time to break down. Okay? They're used in very, very low amounts because they're extremely effective in low amounts, but that doesn't mean they're safe. In fact, they're not.
Is there an alternative to using organosilica as a weeder, sticker weeder sort of thing?
Well, you can. Well, the Roundup itself has glyphosate, and all those products have a spread of sticker in them anyway. All it means is if you use organosilicon, you can knock your rate down. It also makes them rain fast very quickly. Instead of they rain fast within like 10 minutes. Sometimes with herbicides, you want to make 8 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours before rain, and the herbicides still work. It doesn't matter with organosilicons; it's sucked in. They're safe in any conditions. I've seen amazing stuff like, people be spraying wild ginger. And you can spray the bottom half of the leaf and you just see the shininess of the pesto working its way up the leaf like that. And then it goes around the corner of the leaf and down the other side. It's amazing. It's just amazing how it spreads. So it makes the herbicide work a whole lot better, but it ain't safe. So I think I've had enough.
Thank you so much, Jack.
I'd like to think of mold as the way we mold our future, the method of least disturbance in every way. And thank you so much.